All right, so I think we should get started here. I don't want to keep everyone waiting. For anyone who didn't make it, this thing's going to be recorded, and we'll share that out afterwards. Joel, do you want to stream that on YouTube, or are we already going?
Cool.
Oh, looks like we're already going.
We're live on YouTube, so you guys are all set to go.
Thanks, Joel. All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to another Agility Days learning session. So this has been a series that we've been doing. We started sort of, it's been a few months ago now, and we're heading all the way into summer. So every 2 weeks, we've got something to talk about. And today, we are going to be talking pretty deep dive into some developer stuff on a different way to build websites using a headless CMS. And in this case, we'll be talking, about Agility CMS in particular. So Node middleware is the topic of the day here, and something that a lot of people are interested in as an alternative to a lot of these sort of popular JAMstack frameworks and stuff out there as a way to build a website. So before we get too far into things, I just want to sort of reiterate that, we're here to learn about each other, and we're all in this together. And I think that, actually that tagline, we're all in this together. We had that in long before this whole, pandemic thing started. And I think it rings true now more than ever. So we're all in this together. It's okay to ask questions. And of course, something's over your head, don't be afraid to ask. Our goal here is to really, teach everyone something. Hopefully you guys can get something you didn't know out of this today, and can help you in the future. So it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to interrupt. We'll be monitoring the chat. As we'll be going through things here, if we see something pop up, we'll try to pause and answer those questions where we can. And then, of course, if there's any additional questions, there'll be some Q&A after the session as well. Cool. So just some introductions, some things to do to get started first. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is James Vidler. I'm the VP of Product here at Agility CMS. I've been here at Agility now for almost 8 years now. And a little known story about myself is actually I was a developer who actually implemented Agility for my company's website 8 years ago, actually 10 years ago now. And I loved the product so much that I decided to leave that company and go work for Agility, and haven't looked back since. But I promise we don't poach all of our customers' developers, just me. All right, so I am very, very pleased to have Arjuna join us today to talk about Node middleware. So Arjuna is the Director of Technology at Dotfusion, which is one of our longest and probably I would say largest development partners that we have working with us at Agility CMS. So they've been building websites for customers using Agility CMS for, I don't know how long now. How many years has it been now, Arjuna?
And I think like a year after you guys started.
Yeah, okay, so that's even before my time. So yeah, you guys were already working with us even before I came on board. So longtime partner. But also some other things you may not know about Arjuna is that he's a huge foodie. If you ever want some advice on some good eats, specifically fried chicken, Korean fried chicken, talk to him, especially on the east side. I know he works out of actually right across the street from where I live right now, which is on Carlaw, so on the east end of Toronto. So if you want to know some foods, good places to eat, talk to Arjuna. Also, I have to say he has probably one of the most attractive accents I've ever heard. And so it's always nice to listen to you talk. So Without further ado, why are we here? What are we doing today? We're here to learn, how you can use Node.js essentially with server-side rendering with the Headless CMS in an effective way. There are a bunch of different ways you can do it. Pleased to have Arjuna here, who's actually done a lot of work around this, and he has something he'd like to share with us, with everyone at Agility, but also all of you that are joining. And I don't know much about this. He's given me some tidbits here and there, but I'm really excited to actually dive into this and see what it's all about, because I've heard great things, and I know you've launched numerous websites using this. I want to learn more. I want to know how we can do this. So, without further ado, let's go forward. So Arjuna, I'm going to, nice glasses. See, I didn't plan that at all. So I'm going to flip the tables over to you. Perhaps you can share a screen and let's take us for a ride.
Right, excellent. So before I start screen sharing, I just want to talk a little bit about why you might want to use this. Just touch on the idea of server-side rendering versus like a static side generator, just as a broad concept. It's kind of funny because like if you've been working on the web for a long time, when the JAMstack first came out, like the thing everyone is thinking is, oh wow, we're going to like 20 years before again, like to flat file, flat HTML, rendered sites. And then the idea with server-side rendering is basically, imagine going back 6 years ago, and where you're thinking about rendering things, or rather presenting information on whatever screen or display you're worried about. It doesn't matter, but presenting information in some way, or even an API, really doesn't matter. Presenting the information in the way that matters, but presenting it in a way where the connection to the presentation of the information and the place where the information is stored, that connection is a rock solid bond. It's just a pipe, so it just pipes through directly. As opposed to a situation where you have a static site generation where you publish something, there's a bunch of a build and so on and so forth, and like it actually there's no real pipe. What you're seeing might not be a true representation of what's actually the state of your content.
Right. So what you're referring to there is really a difference of like, content that is changing in real time versus content that kind of has to go through a build process, right?
Exactly. So, where, so that's like one of the use cases where you might think of having, server-side rendering in place, where, you want to have your content always fresh, always, ready to go, and there's no lag, or rather the lag is as minimal as you can have. So that's the essential, scenario with that. Then you have other scenarios where, you might run into needing to have some kind of server-side rendering. And the primary scenario is where you have some kind of business case where you need to do some piece of logic, mostly for security reasons, on the server. One of the simplest things is like, a lot of the time we interact with APIs and we need to have a situation where this little component that we build or a module that's sitting there, in our page, it needs to, let's say, interact with an API, but the API is, it needs to be proxied, right? Something as simple as that.
Right. Yeah. You need to hide some API key or something like that.
Exactly.
You can't just make an AJAX call. You kind of need to do some things behind the scenes, right?
Behind the scene, yeah. And that's primarily security related items. Then, you can run it right there. The other kind of scene where you might want to think around, why you might want to server-side render versus server-side generate is actually getting around the complications and the strangeness around build processes with JAMstacks. While things like Netlify make it like super easy, and even now make it like super easy for you to actually set those up fairly straightforward. You can also run into lots of very interesting problems. And, if you're a slightly old school person and you like to have like a little more visibility on what's actually going on the server, that's also a good case to do this. And so there's a bunch of cases out there.
Yeah, and actually I just wanted to add on that a little bit. We're talking about JAMstack and the difference of, like, because they're both two different approaches, right? It's like, we're going to use JavaScript to build a website, right? It's like, that's just what we're going to do. You can either do that using server-side rendering, or you can do it like JAMstack, where it's statically built ahead of time, and then we're just deploying HTML. But I know, one of the, JAMstack has a lot of great benefits in terms of, it's cheap to run. You don't need to actually run it on a server. You can just have it running and just serving static files. And it's also kind of hard to mess up from a developer standpoint, because it's like, if you have a problem, you're going to find it in the build process. You're not going to find it in production, later on down the line. But there's trade-offs there, right? And I know one of the things that we're starting to see from, people implementing more and more JAMstack sites with Agility is, it really comes down to that editor experience, because they're so used to making a change in the CMS, hitting publish, and seeing that change instantly happen in production.
Yeah.
And while you can set up things like previews to help bridge that gap, when it comes to JAMstack, you're still always going to have that build and deploy process for your production site that could take some time. Maybe it's not a lot of time, and it's getting a lot faster. Like, I know our own website is entirely on Gatsby. And sometimes it takes 30 seconds to do a build, which is totally reasonable. But there's still that 30 seconds that the editor's kind of like, did my thing go? Is there an error in the build process? They're just kind of left in the dark a little bit in terms of what that is. So absolutely. One of the things we actually are looking to help with that is to actually be able to provide more visibility into actually what's happening when builds are happening, so you can see that in the content manager. But this is something that all JAMstack sites are sort of trying to deal with and improve. But what we're looking at today is this is a whole nother way of doing things where it kind of eliminates the need for a build process. You can still write your site all in JavaScript and get those benefits in a more traditional setup. And so, yeah, that's what I'm really excited to learn more about.
Also, just touching on that point of like, the editors and like their the experience they have. When something is so abstracted, like the, like having that build process, if you're talking to someone who's like, primary focus is being a marketing person, and you tell them something has to be a build process, the first thing that happens is like, they're just like, oh shit, like this is like really too complicated for me, right? Yeah. They're like, okay, you're just speaking in tongues now. And that's not the nicest scene as far as we're concerned. And, something that we really take a lot of care of at Dotfusion and personally is like ensuring that whoever we build for, they have an exceptional experience, because we don't want a situation where they're like, oh, you built this beautiful site for us, but it's a pain in the butt to manage.
Yeah, or they're contacting you and be like, hey, I made this update, but it's not going live, and maybe the build process broke, right? So yeah, I mean, like it's still JAMstack still has a bit of ways to go to help improve on that editor experience for sure.
Yeah. But on a side note, there is some silly things you can do to get around that with the JAMstack, especially with Gatsby. But that's a separate topic.
Yeah. We've had other talks where we talk about ways you can improve that editor experience. But it is something you really have to like you said, you kind of have to look at who's going to be editing the site, right? Like, are they going to be able to be okay with the fact that there may be a delay when they publish things, right? So that's, there's no one tool that fits everything, right? You get a project, look at it and say, okay, would a JAMstack approach for this, or maybe should we take more of a sort of traditional, server rendered app into play? But the good news is that you can use JavaScript for both. So from a developer standpoint, it's like, it's just a slightly different way to do things. And I think developers should be comfortable in both areas, right? When it makes sense.
Absolutely. And just the fact that it's all JavaScript, it just makes life so much easier to manage.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. I'm going to jump a little bit into just looking at some code now, if that's cool with everyone.
Yeah, let's do it.
We'll actually look at, I don't know what the general experience is with Node. I'm assuming that everyone's kind of comfy with it. I'll do a quick, just like a high level run through of like the logic of what we're doing here. All right, great. I'm going to share my screen, and you will see. Let me know if you see this this editor here.
Yeah, that looks pretty good to me.
All right, and do I need to zoom in or zoom out, or? All right.
Yeah, personally, I think it's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
I think some of your back windows are a little small, but I think this one looks good.
All right, great. Very, 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 very simply, when we see, let's just start from the very beginning. When we see a server, what are we thinking about? It's basically, at its very, very basic scene, we want something to get something, like at a certain URL, and do some stuff. Cool. So you hit a URL, do some stuff, send some stuff back. So it's a very simple, straightforward process. Ask and you shall receive is the general vibe. Cool. Now, when you have an ask and you shall receive, I mean, this is the most basic. This is just the Express.js Hello World application. And it doesn't matter. You could do this in Koa or you could do it anywhere. The basic scene is, okay, we want to do something here. Okay. Now we come to the next step, which is like, what if we want to do some complicated things here? So then you have situations where, you'll do app.get and then you'll say, whatever, I want to get something on slash, stores that represents the stores on my, for my client. And then you go and you sit and handcraft every single one of these. All right, cool. Sorry, this is like a really shitty crash course on like just the basic scene of what's going on. So excuse me if it gets if it's just really silly and useless. All right, and then it always ends with like doing something where you're sending your request back, right? So this could be this is my store page. Now essentially what is happening here is when you want something rich to go on here, you want a heading tag and all kinds of stuff going on, this and that floating around there. What is happening is the server is always sending back text. So it's sending back an H1 saying, this is my store page, right? And so on and so forth. It's actually sending the structure of your content back, right? So this is just something to keep in mind. So this is what we're trying to achieve. Okay, great. Of course, I have a syntax error. My life is a syntax error. So, okay, so we have a simple scenario here. Now, let's zoom out a bit and think about this in terms of a CMS. Now, when you think of this in terms of a CMS, now, I'm not even talking agility now. Let's say you want to hook this up to WordPress. No problem. You can do it, right?
You don't want to do that.
Sorry, what did you say?
I said you don't want to do that.
Maybe not. I mean, there's cases for everything in the world. And it's nice to have an open mind. So essentially, the first piece of the puzzle is this part. How do I tell my application to dynamically be able to deal with these URLs? Where am I storing these URLs? Who's responsible for them? Do I want a situation where every time a URL is updated, I have to go and a developer has to go in there and write a new rule for my new URL?
No, you don't want to do that.
That's absolutely useless. Where you're going to end up in a situation where, not much is going to be possible. You're going to be, just getting yourself in over your head really quickly. All right, great. What can we do instead? What we can do instead is say, hey, how about if I have a list of all my URLs up front? Okay, cool. So then you could do something like this, where you just say, before anything, let's just say, I'm just going to do it I'm just going to, whatever, I'll just do it whatever. Sorry, I'm a big fan of Axios over Fetch. I know lots of people.
We are too. We use the Axios for our Agility Content Fetch SDK.
Right. Yeah. It's ideal. Everything becomes a promise, and it's nice and fat and nice. All right. Cool. So when you have a situation like that, you could do something like this, where you say const all my URLs is equal to Axios.get endpoint with my URLs as an array. Cool.
Right. So what you're doing here is you're actually making an external HTTP request to an endpoint to get your routes, right?
Exactly. You're getting all your routes right away, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Let me say routes. How advanced. All right. So then you could do something, very simple, where you do, whatever, all my routes.map, and then you can map it over, and then you can have each route, and then you take the route, and then you start doing stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So when the app starts, it's like, okay, I'm going to go hit this API to be able to get my list of my routes, and then I'm going to start. That's your sort of starting point, right?
Exactly, right? And then you can like do stuff dynamically. Okay, now, cool. So this seems like a very straightforward process. You know, this is absolutely straightforward. You get an array of all the, you know, URLs you want to compose against, and then you compose against them. Great. So that can just basically replace all this stuff that's sitting here. All right. Well and good, but we're still quite a far ways away from what we actually want to do. Because, you know, when we look at a web page, now I'm going to zoom out and just like talk about a web page. Now this is some stuff that's going on the server, but like, let's talk about what happens on a web page, like just standard. Let's just go to like google.com or let's go to agilitycms.com. All right. So, you know, we look at this web page, there's a lot of stuff going on it, right? Like there's like the fact that a title came up here, right? There's the fact that there's a certain order in which like stuff happens on the page. There's obviously some amount of marketing like JavaScript that's being injected from somewhere else. Like there's lots of little bits and pieces that you have to worry about, right? Now it starts getting really, really silly if you're sitting and worrying about that like that, right? Where you're like, okay, manage the head, right? Okay, manage the script insertions, right? Okay. Oh, and then I haven't even come to like other silly things. Like, I don't know, do you guys have a sitemap.xml?
I think so. Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
We have the site's all on Gatsby now, so we have a Gatsby plugin. I think that generates it for us.
Right, that generates it. So like you got to worry about all this like stuff. Like it's a lot of stuff to worry about, right? But the cool thing to worry about is that like it's just a checklist of stuff. It's not like it's like literally okay. I got this checklist. I got to like tick it off one by one. Cool. All right, great. So then it brings us to some interesting scenarios. So you're like, okay, there's all this stuff happening. Then there's also other things happening. Let's take this menu. You know, there's some amount of dynamic stuff happening here. But you know, technically I could achieve all of this with CSS. I don't need to like, you know, remount a JavaScript framework to like sit on this. Let's contrast it with something where we have something very complicated. So here you have something that's a fairly complicated component, right? Where, you know, I click on things, I can like do like various types of search, sort, and filter. And then I can even like search within those results that I have where I want soup. And it's only going to give me take out healthy soup that is gluten-free, places that have it. That's like a fairly complicated situation. Now here, you definitely need like a robust front-end JavaScript situation to manage all that.
Yeah, but you also need a backend who's going to actually return you like those nice results, right?
Exactly.
And if you're building a site in JAMstack, you would have to move that to a serverless function to be able to do something like that. But in your case here, you don't have to do that because you're running this on a server, right?
Exactly. We're running it on a server, and we're also doing some other things as well. Where anyway, that's a different story. But basically, you're right. It is the server, and the server is doing some stuff for you, and it can manage a lot of this stuff for you. What's also cool is that, you know, you have the situation like this, and because of the fact that like you have control over your server, especially for like, you know, like silly old school, like silly idiots like me, you have this scene where you're like, oh, I have full control, so I can tweak and do this and do that. And like, you know, let's install this new thing there and see if like we'll get like, you know, a small little performance upgrade, so on and so forth. You can go bananas with it. All right, great. So we do have a scene where sometimes we render components that are just simply text. Mm-hmm. Now, technically, if I were to render this component as a React component and it remounts on the site, it is arguable that that is kind of a waste of browser resources and time.
Yeah, because if it's not changing and it's static, why does it need to run through JavaScript, right?
Absolutely. There's no reason for it to run through JavaScript. Now, of course, you know, that kind of finesse to get to, it's quite easy to do, but it takes a little more tweaking. I'll point you guys to it, but the boilerplate that I released will not have it. All right, but just so you know, I mean, like some of the newer sites we're building actually have that ability where we have the ability where when we drop a module, we have a file, and now we're even letting the editor decide that in the CMS, where they can decide whether it gets only server rendered. right? Because if you just have a piece of text, there's no point mounting React and then like, you know, you're gonna hit like the JavaScript engine in your browser, and then, you know, you're gonna get penalized for page speed on it, you know, unnecessarily. Gatsby will do that to you.
Yeah, we're actually starting to see a new wave of frameworks start to pop up that are like, yeah, very much taking that same approach where, you know, you actually don't need JavaScript to render it, right? And it's like, unless you absolutely need to, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a waste. It's an absolute waste to have this perfectly fine, you know, on, you know, when the page renders and then like 0.3 milliseconds later or whatever, like it like wipes the page and re-renders everything really quickly in a giant rush, and then like, you know, the browser stacks, and then, you know, you look at like your performance hits in your page speed, and you're like, oh, okay, like not so ideal. Okay, cool. Side scenes. So I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of complication with the front end, and like, you know, how you actually want to render these things, what you want to do with them. And when you have a server-side renderer, in theory, you have total control. You can do whatever you want. Right. Excellent. So let's jump back to some code here. So we want to manage some script insertions, right? We want to do stuff like, let's just go through this one by one. So because when we say do stuff dynamically, what do we mean? We actually mean something very simple, right? Get the content for that route.
Yeah. Yeah, because now at this point it's like, okay, you have an incoming page that just matched your route, and it's like, now what? What do you do after that? It's like, all right, I have this page. What do I do with it now?
Exactly. So what do I do? So I want to get that route dynamically. I want to get the content for it, and I want to do some stuff. All right. In the case of, you know, Agility CMS, for example, I can't query the CMS for the route. I can't say, give me /food. It won't give me the page. I'll have to give it the page ID, right? So which means I need to actually do something with, take all my routes, right? Once I have all my routes, right? Find the page ID and use that for the next step.
And then, so like in this case, well, if we're talking agility at this point, like that call where you say, you know, all my routes axios.get, that would actually return to you like the sitemap that you have with the URLs, and then I'll also give you the page ID, right?
Absolutely. So what we're getting here is sitemap flat. Cool.
Yeah.
That's the endpoint we're concerned with agility. In WordPress, for example, it gets like super interesting. Or Contently is another beast, actually. One of the reasons I really like agility is that like it still thinks of it as a CMS for the web, even though it's like got lots of stuff going on. Like the fact that you organize your content in pages really makes it like a wonderful experience for editors. And you know, it's really a one-to-one relationship on like, this is a page, and then like they represent URLs, and then you go down.
Yeah, and this is the content for that page. Yeah.
Exactly. All right, cool. Now you get these page IDs. Now you get into slightly more complicated situations here, right? What if it doesn't give me a page ID, right? But it gives me a content ID, like in the case of dynamic content nested under a, you know, a particular page. Case in point would be the site I was just showing you, where you have, you know, this site here. All this stuff is dynamic content. When I click it, it's like whacking down. So in Agility CMS, when I look at /news, these URLs are being built from shared content, right? Sorry for the, I really like the pink and
yeah, that's a pretty sweet looking face mask there.
The whole face mask style scene is quite fascinating right now. All right, sorry, I'll not make pandemic jokes. All right, so, you know, when you have a scene like that, you might have a thing like where it gives you a content ID. Now then you're just like, okay, then, you know, find the content ID as well, right? And
yeah,
you know,
yeah, and you may have multiple content IDs that you need to look up, right? So it's like what we give you is sort of a manifest of like the content that you need, but sometimes you still got to go out and grab it, right?
Yeah, so you got to do lots of stuff. Now you might, you know, like if you take any, like most content, I mean, most headless systems, basically like a page will be, you know, when you request, you know, some kind of endpoint, what you will get is one of two things. you'll either get an object, right, where you have like described data, which, you know, is like, you know, like it's sitting in an object, like where you say you describe a store, like in the examples I was showing you right now, where there'll be a title, there'll be a something, there'll be a this, it'll have an image, it'll have this, it'll have that. It'll basically be a form that they fill out, right? Or you will get that described data in an array. All right. And when I say describe data in an array, I mean, in the case of Agility CMS, it would literally be like how that zone comes to you. A zone comes to you with a bunch of pre-described data as an array. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
So
we give an array of essentially modules, right? Or content zones, and then the modules from within there, and then the content for each one. Yeah.
Right. So we're dealing with page.zones, all right, which is an array. Okay. And then that array, we're going to loop through each of them. Right? Sorry, I'm just writing like really crappy JavaScript here just so everyone just knows what's going on there. So zones is an array, and I'm mapping over that, and then each zone is another array, right? And then I'm mapping over the zones array, all right? And then what am I going to get? I'm mapping over this guy now. Oof, arg. I shouldn't write in like weird pseudocode, but bear with me, all right? So you're going to map over that guy, and you're actually dealing with a module. Ugh.
Yeah, and then a module has all the fields for that module.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and then you can choose what you want to do with that module. So, you know, for example, if you look at Agility CMS Gatsby source, for example, what's happening behind the scenes is that it has, I think you guys call it like page template or page renderer or something like that. I mean, you can look at the source.
We have I think we have like a content zone component that we essentially use to render out all of those things. But really, like in all of the ways that you can build agility websites, whether it's .NET, Gatsby, Next.js, or this, it's all the exact same concept. It's starting from the sitemap and working your way down to the granular module and the data there. And then it's like, as long as that module corresponds to some sort of front end view, and you pass that data you need to it, that's all you need. And then in some cases, you might need some extra data that isn't included in the module. And then there's where you just make a separate API call.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head like a champion of whacking hammers too. So yeah, so essentially that's our scene, right? So we really want, this is our bread and butter.
Yeah, module, code template.
Code template. Module results in code. Now we can do a number of things here, right? So let's say we just continue with this pseudocode example. What I could do here is do res.send, right? Some stuff. Right?
Yeah, so you're returning that response, yeah.
Right. So I would do this res.send and then actually handle my modules within this res.send. That's one approach, right? Where you can do something like this and then map that guy and then keep going down the line and render each one, right? So render each one. Now you could render it in whatever way you want it. You want to render it as a React component? No problem. You want to render it as an Angular component? No problem. You want to render it as just, you know, some text? No problem. But what is the crux? The crux is that whatever we want to render, we have to turn it into text. That is the crux.
Yeah.
So all this stuff has been said. Now I'm just going to jump into those gists that I think James will share with you after we're done. All right. Just to get an idea of what the larger scene could be. Dude, do you know where I put that gist?
You send it to me 1 second. I think I have it.
Here. I think
you got it. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So the entire logic of what I did here, where I said like this, explicitly do this and then get it and set up these routes, you can do all this stuff in a slightly simpler way. All right. When you're using a node. What I could do is just say here app.use, right? Oof, arg. Something silly here where I basically say, you know, function my middleware. So basically that takes our request, our res, and then the next object, which is a thing in, you know, it's just a little convention with Express where if you say next, it'll stop the function and pass it back to the higher function in the line. All right. And I could do all this stuff here, right? And then I could do next, right? Or rather, I would actually do next right here, okay? And I wouldn't return anything out here. this is my essential scene. So I could do something like say app.use my middleware, right? And then it would start using the logic that has been described in this function. Sorry.
Gotcha.
Mixing ES6 with old school JS is what happens if you've been writing JavaScript. Yeah. All right. So essentially, that's the essential concept, just so everyone's aware of what's going on. All right. I'm going to get rid of all this nonsense. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it's a lot of pseudocode and it won't run. So let's run here. Okay.
Can you zoom in on your window a little bit there?
Oh, for sure, man. Let me make that gigantic and make this super gigantic. How does that work?
Sweet. Yeah, that looks good.
All right, great. So this is a React implementation of this, and then if we have time, I'll actually jump into a real world implementation where we'll see some interesting things. Very, very simple React implementation. What am I doing here? I am saying use Agility middleware. Okay, this is all well and good. What the hell does this Agility middleware do? So what we do with our Agility middleware is
where is that Agility middleware?
Right on top.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Okay. So you'll see there's a simple helper function here so that you get your sitemap item from your content ID. Just know you send it some content ID and you send a content ID and then where it lives in the sitemap, right? Yeah. So that's the only helper function that's out here. Actually, that should be moved into a separate place, and in some of our newer projects, it's moved elsewhere. But the guts are here. Okay, there's this thing called Create API, right? That is a wrapper around Agility's Content Fetch API. Okay, and there's certain reasons why we do it this way. Primarily because it makes it easier for us to manage promises and also batch promises. All right. Actually, on this anyway, that's a separate thing. There's another thing that's built on top of the SDK internally that we've started to use, but it's not yet production ready, but it's sitting there. Okay, and then we have this middleware function. We set it up as a higher order function, so it's a function that returns a function. Okay, so if you look, it's actually called Create Agility middleware, which takes some amount of configuration and some amount of options. And then what it does in the end, right, is that all this nonsense that's here, it returns a promise.
Right. Okay. So then you can wait. So then your app that's using that knows when all of the child functions are done, right?
Exactly. Oh, it's too bad I deleted that. I shouldn't delete that thing. But is it somewhere here? Okay, yeah, but yeah, it's here. But basically, when I say do all this stuff, get all my routes when I'm doing that here, it needs to wait to get all the routes. It needs to wait to get all the data. It needs to query your the content fetch API. It needs to query your database or whatever it needs to do. It doesn't matter, right? So it's waiting. Cool. And then I'm going to run through this line by line. Very simple. If there's no config, just keep going ahead. Don't interfere, right? Don't throw an error. Don't do anything. Just go on, right? It's fine.
Forgiving, yeah.
Yeah, very forgiving. Don't do anything. Just be cool. And also because when we write every project, Dotfusion relies extremely heavily on boilerplate code, but also on boilerplate code that all the developers understand. It is critical, absolutely critical. There's no scene of go just copy paste that thing and dump it here and start writing. No, we're not interested in doing that. One of the primary reasons we're not interested in doing that is if you understand this stuff, you can do anything. The world's your oyster, right? As far as content management, building on content management systems go.
Yeah.
Great. We're doing some funny things here. We're just setting up our prod API and our preview API. So we have those ready for us. Yeah. We have a shitty little thing that's going here where this is just to deal with favicons because it actually bombs out first. It's just a weird quirk with the way browsers request things. So we just have that little thing to not hit it. All right. And then we go to the heavy duty logic. This is a little hack to see if you got Agility preview key, in the query string, then just let it preview.
Let it go. Yeah.
Let it go, and then just use the preview API.
Yeah.
Otherwise, use the prod API.
By the way, if you actually want to check if the preview key is actually correct, We implemented some code in that in a Next.js starter. So let me know if you want that afterwards. I can.
Oh yeah, that would be
send that
amazing.
your way.
Yeah, I'll dump that in for sure. That would actually be amazing. All right, then we're doing some things here. In this example, I'm not batching the promises, all right? But in production, all these promises are batched, all right? The reason I'm like giving you guys this kind of like simpler version of it is that there's, you have more Lego to play with,
yeah,
right? And you really understand what's going on. So I'm waiting for the sitemap. I'm waiting for the nested sitemap. I need these two things. They're critical. Why do I need my sitemap? I need my sitemap to know my structure of my URLs. Why do I need my nested sitemap? I need my nested sitemap to ensure I know which page belongs to where the hierarchy is, right? And there's some reasons for what you would do with that. Okay, cool. Now I'm gonna do some funny things. You know, Agility has this silly thing, like if you click preview from a shared content, it'll actually just send you into a URL with question mark content ID. Like if I go here, and then if I go into like shared content, and then I'm like, I don't know, somewhere here, I'll just go to something random, which nobody cares about. Holiday caroling, this sounds exciting. If I preview right now, what happens is that it whacks out a new guy, but it'll actually go with the content ID in the URL. It's a query param, right?
Yeah.
So, because it doesn't know where in the URL structure you're gonna actually be nesting this guy. So what do we do then? In that case, we actually get that content ID from the URL param, and we use our little helper method here, which has a extremely long and complicated piece of logic, which just finds out where in the sitemap you are. Okay. Sorry if I'm running you guys through it step by step, but I just want to so you're absolutely clear about how to set this up yourselves.
Yeah.
And you don't need anyone, which is the whole point of
yeah, well, I think actually what's really helpful here is actually just talking about how this all fits together and like the process of if you were to write your own thing, how you'd approach this. And I really like the way you've taken this approach.
Yeah, just note that some of this stuff in production, we're not using it like this, especially stuff like this. We don't do this in production.
Yeah.
All these API requests get batched.
Right. So you send them all out at once, as opposed to wait for one to come back, then do the other one, then do the other one. Yeah,
exactly,
you do them all at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, this is time.
Yeah.
Right. And some things are needed before other things. Like this sitemap is needed before anything, but sitemap nested is not really needed till much later in the process. So you can actually batch it at a later point. Right. Okay, cool. So if like Agility has like a content ID in the query param, deal with it. It just gives you a redirect. All right. And what it's doing here is that it's actually just deciding what that path is and like ending the process right here. So you'll see that we're returning a result. Res is a result object, right? Okay, cool. Now there's a bunch of interesting things that happen here. All right. We're like, get all prefetched content items, get all prefetched content lists. Now, why the hell would we do this? All right. I'll give you a simple answer. Let's take this implementation, for example. We have this, we always, in our things, we always have a shared content piece, which is called global language resources. Let's say, somebody has like this error message for your first name is required, right? It needs to be stored somewhere. That should never be sitting hard-coded in your code. Like if you hard-code that in your code, hey, hello, I don't know, do you want to make more work for yourself or?
Yeah. Also, it's like then what do you do for multi-language, right? When they need the same thing in French. Yeah.
Exactly.
So good to plan ahead of time.
And there's all kinds of interesting scenarios where this becomes useful. I think with this we also have, which is actually, we have a parser. If any of you are familiar with .NET, you'll recognize this kind of like string interpolation. But this works for us. We have a JavaScript implementation to manage this as well. So there's some interesting things going on there. These kinds of things, you need to have all this stuff. So what do we do then? We basically say that, when we create this with some options, send the options in where you tell it what are all the prefetched content lists you want.
Right. Okay. So I guess the idea is if you have content that you're going to need like either across the site or on like multiple pages, just put it in here so you always just get it and have it ready.
Exactly.
So like if you're going to get like the global header or the global footer, for example, that would be another thing you might want to put in there, right?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. And let's actually look at our agility options.js, which is what is being consumed when we create our agility middleware. Okay. And we go down to agility options, you'll see that down here, I'm, for example, telling it to get a content list called timeline, which references the names of all the content lists that you want in that data. So I have a reference name of timeline in one of those content lists, and this is the ID of the content item I want, right? Just as a simple example there, right? Okay, cool. So what does it do then? It basically goes and says, all right, I'm gonna get all these guys, I'm gonna get all these guys, all right? The ideal way to do this would be to take these two items and batch it.
Yeah.
Right? That's the absolute best way to do it. Batch in a single array of promises and then promise out all the entire array. So, you know, you're cool. The reason I don't want to go so deep into batching right now, and I didn't expose it for this session, is there's a little bit of manipulation you need to do because you're batching different types of endpoints. So you need to be able to handle that organization, and then when you run into promise mapping, and also if you have an array of promises, another array of promises, and you have nested arrays of promises, and you want to flatten the array before you batch it, there's some interesting things that go on, kind of JavaScript quirks. I don't want to go into all that today. Okay, some simple things here. We're just figuring out what the current URL slug is here. We have a simple thing just to like handle home. This is actually like a quirk in Agility CMS. And we always call our root page home. So we just have that scene going here. But that's a little quirk in Agility CMS. Ideally, I should have put that in options, but all our sites, we call it home, so it doesn't matter, all right? We set up our this sitemap item, which is something that we want to do, you know, when we render our components. Blah, 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 blah. So redirect to 404 if we don't have a sitemap item.
Right. So that means like if the request somehow gotten here, but we can't find that page in the sitemap, 404. This is not this. There's nothing to be able to go any further.
Exactly, and that options.4 error 404 is actually sitting on our options page, and errors/404 is a node in our page list in Agility.
So your error page is also powered by Agility.
Absolutely.
That's cool.
You need to have everything powered by Agility. Like if you have a CMS, everything is CMS. It's do or die. You know, hey, what's the point? The point of a content management system is like, you know, don't ever talk to a developer again in your life, unless you want something new, you know, or something's actually broken, right? So if they want to go and change their content of their 404 page and like get quirky and put like an image of a dog that is looking for its bone, then they can do that. It's pretty cool. All right, then a couple of interesting things happen. All right. This is again, you know, Agility, dealing with Agility, where we're saying if current page is dynamic, because Agility has like a dynamic key that comes back if you hit a dynamic item in your page list, and then it doesn't actually give you the dynamic content on that content. It just gives you the kind of zones on that content. You actually need the dynamic content as well. So we just set that up right here. All right. Now this is a simple scene here. I don't know what this else is doing. It could just be deleted, of course. All right. So basically what we're saying is that if the current, and sorry, I know like some hardcore JS people, especially TypeScript people, will hate me for like double bang, but I love double bangs and I hate TypeScript. So whenever, and I love the sound that goes off in my head when I'm typing it, like bang, bang, current page. So I just love that scene. It's just like so wonderful. So sorry, you guys. I'm really sorry for like being not friendly to your linters. Go adapt it if you want. Yeah. So in fact, even on my, when I do have to write TypeScript, I actually modify the linter so it lets me bang, bang, bang also. I really like the sound of it in my head. Cool. So now we get into some really interesting things that are going on here. All right. Now this is the heart and soul of why you might want server-side rendering in your project. You know, the real heart and soul. Why do you want server-side rendering in your project? When you want to do some kind of strange business logic on the server, which is not managed on the front end at all. Cool. And primarily, what happens with that business logic when you want to, you know, set something up on the server? There's only one thing and one thing only. You're fetching some data, or you're manipulating data or you're checking permissions. That's your C, security. But in the end, you're returning a string. Cool. Something to keep in mind. So what we do here is fairly simple. We basically say we have our agility options here. So I'm going to jump into my agility options, all right? And I have something here called zone handlers, all right? So for example, I've set it up here where I can define a zone called masthead in Agility CMS, all right? And when I have my masthead zone, automatically push an extra module called the breadcrumbs into it. So I don't need the user to author it in Agility.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Right? So I can push an entire module in, no problem, right? Okay, so how's it dealing with that? And seriously, you guys, this is a sketch. So go ahead and rebuild this. This is like the logic, all the Legos here for you guys to like figure it out and do what you want, right? So I'm taking my zones, and for each zone, I am basically checking if I have a function in my options to deal with that zone, right? If I have a function to deal with that options, execute that function, pass it the zone, pass it the API, pass it the nested sitemap, pass it this sitemap item, pass it the current URL, pass it any query strings that are lying around. Basically, I'm just giving it a whole whack of stuff so it's flexible enough to do whatever it wants, right? 90% of the time, you won't even use all that stuff. Okay.
Yeah. And so those handlers are essentially a function that gets called when a certain zone matches that name, right?
Exactly. So if a zone matches the name of masthead, the masthead function gets called right here, right? And the critical thing is that it returns a zone. All right. So we do that. And then after we do that, for every zone, we map through the modules in that zone and we check if there are any module handlers for that zone. Here's a simple scenario here where we have a search module built out. So if we have a query string, sorry, this should just be query.s, not request.query.s. I just copy pasted it in there just so you get an idea. So this will fail, but because of that, it should be query.s. Return the module if it doesn't have a query. But if it has a search query, right?
Yeah.
Return the search results with the rendered page. Why not, right? So it goes, it uses Google custom search. You know, you put your search key, you put your CX, it goes, it does it, it returns it, and it actually sets the search results as a prop in Agility module, and then returns the Agility module.
Nice. So you're like injecting extra data into the actual module. Yeah.
Extra data, extra logic. You know, you can go bananas.
Yeah. You know what this actually reminds me of is this reminds me in .NET world of like a controller action result where it's like you can do things beforehand before you pass it to your view. Yeah.
Exactly. This is a very flat implementation of it. One of the reasons why I also like to keep it so flat is that it's extremely easy for developers to understand. Like literally, like over an hour, I can walk everyone through a single like line by line, and everyone knows exactly what's going on. They don't need to take a course. It's all just functions. Nice, simple functions. Okay, cool. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm also got like a little bit of stuff here to handle unset titles, do some like random bullshit there. All right, cool. And then what I do is I set up an object in my result called page data, and I say, next, go on. Don't interrupt. Cool. Now what happens is that if you look at my server.js, there's something cool happening here, which is I'm telling the server, come what may, use the Agility middleware. All right. I have logic in the Agility middleware to manage 404s, all this stuff. So it's just going to pass all that stuff. All right. And then I'm saying, get any URL that's coming. All right. And you remember at the end of our Agility middleware, create Agility middleware, it returns this, it injects the page data into your result object. Right. So that's just sitting here. Right. This is a silly little thing just to help us. And then since I want to render in React, doing the simplest thing here, I'm importing my app component and I'm just pushing my page data into it and I'm saying render to string using render to string from React DOM server. Right. That turns my markup into a plain HTML string, happy and joyful. I take that plain HTML string and I just embed it into root, right? This is the most basic implementation of this. It can get super complex
I
all
can
right,
imagine.
as we go along. If you want to break it up module by module, you want to do like, you can go bananas with this thing, but I just kept it basic so everyone gets the concept. All right, you've got all your basic stuff here, whatever you want. You want to set up some complex shit in your head, you can. If you want to do some really complicated things like pull the Agility page data, and then for that page, if you want to take the top scripts and bottom scripts, you can insert that right away in here instead of injecting via React Helmet. You can do all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, or like you had said before, you could, that markup could just end up being HTML as well, right?
It could be. It's
Totally
totally
just be
yeah.
that stuff.
So
what's cool? Yeah, so what's cool about this is that like a lot of that sort of logic of, getting the right content, mapping things out properly, that's all handled automatically in the middleware. And then like just do whatever front end you want to do, right?
Yeah, do what front end you want to do. And I know we're out of time. I'll take 1 second just to show you an implementation where.
Yeah.
Take a look at this here. All right. I'm just going to go here. All right. You see this single line of code.
Yeah.
I'm saying whenever you hit this URL, yeah, don't go to React. I don't want you to deal with React. I want you to use this dynamic email handler, right? If I look at that dynamic email handler, look at what it actually returns.
That's just HTML, right?
This is HTML, right? So the point being that it doesn't matter what you want to do. In the end, you want your markup. That markup could be a template string, no problem. It could be an Angular app. It could be a React app. It could just be flat HTML. At this point, you could even use res.pagedata to like use something, like old school and happy and joyful, like Jade, or even EJS, just to render your pages. No problem.
Well, you could even in this case, I mean, not that I'd recommend it, but like I imagine, if you build a site this way and as the site ages, there may be a new fancy framework you may want to use, right? And you probably could set this up in a way where it's like, hey, if it's these types of pages or these new pages, use the latest and greatest framework that doesn't exist yet, right?
Absolutely.
And other pages can continue using the existing code, right? So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you'll see here is that we don't do any logic for page templates. All right. And that's because by default, we just like using one page template. We don't like multiple page templates. It actually complicates life massively. And it's also a really old school way of thinking of the web, like with a sidebar and this thing and that thing, like poof, like I don't care about all that. I don't want to even look at that stuff, So we don't use page templates in Dotfusion in a heavy way. But, like you said, we could just set up some logic here saying that, if you have a page template of like, React, render the page using React, right? Or if you have, you could do basically anything you want.
Of course, I guess you'd have to make sure that the modules being rendered to are also written in that same corresponding framework, obviously.
Exactly. But it's all JavaScript and it's all functions. So what becomes useful then is that you can actually just write a piece of logic saying if this, or you can even go really advanced where you say, okay, I have a search bar component and that's written in React. So check if I have a React implementation of the search bar component. Is the search bar function in scope? If it's in scope, render in React. If it's not in scope, render in the other.
Yeah.
It becomes joyful and wonderful, and it really makes your path to do stuff, to keep your sites up to date, to even like change technologies, like you said in the middle. It's all just a wonderful open playground of whatever you want to do. All right. On that note, I'm gonna stop. So cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And I was like, and like you said, it's just JavaScript. So you could even, I bet you could even put this through a static site builder at some point too, where it's like, if you just knew all the different routes to be able to hit, you could actually have that go and generate static HTML.
Dude, like, I don't know, like we have some interesting things going on there. Like I personally like don't like things like Gatsby or Next.js or any frameworks. I really like don't like them. They come with a lot of opinions, and especially when you're thinking about like how things have to be rendered, how you're dealing with data, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And
well, it's great to have that perspective on things too, right? Because like, a lot of our sessions that we're talking about, we're sort of beefing up these frameworks and all the benefits that they give. But so it's really refreshing to hear, a flip side of that, where it's like, you're still having fun with React and other JavaScript frameworks, but in your own way that makes better sense for you and is better enabling your developers to get work done faster, right?
Yeah, for sure. And like some of the things that run there are that like, the logic that runs there is like, when we have these complicated sites that are using like opinionated frameworks, you really have to buy into the opinion.
Yeah. You have to conform.
You really have to buy into the opinion. And it also makes you, like in my opinion, it kind of locks you as a developer into thinking that way a little bit. And that has its pluses. It makes you really fast at doing certain things, right? But then you become tied to your frameworks and your thinking. Anyway, sorry, I could rant and rave about all this stuff forever. So I will stop right now.
Yeah. So to sort of wrap things up here, because I know that was a lot. You are going to be. It's not available just quite yet because life happens, and Arjuna is obviously a busy guy, and he's leading a team of developers building a whole bunch of websites. So he wasn't able to get a boilerplate set up on GitHub just as of yet, but he set up the repo and he's going to get that up soon. So if you want to know how to get started with a sort of boilerplate on this, he's going to be posting this to this link here, which I will just quickly share in the chat. So keep an eye. I would suggest actually going to this and starring it and maybe subscribe to it or for follow updates. So I'm going to add this to the chat window here to everyone for getting started. And then you also had those gists of the sort of drafts that we were looking at too. Do you want to just add those? Yeah, you add those to the chat as well, so so folks have those. Yeah, I think once we have that up there too, we'll probably also do an article, like a blog on our own site, where we'll sort of walk people through how to get started on that. Because I do think it is it's a great alternative to building sites. I know a lot of people that come to build sites with Agility right now are looking at, do I build it in .NET or do I build it in JAMstack? This is another option that really sort of gives you the best of both worlds, I think.
Yeah, and also it, the way we see it is that, it actually, it lets our developers develop extremely quickly. Because in the end, the only thing you got to do is understand how this middleware works, and then you're only building React components. You're never looking at the server again unless you absolutely need to.
Yeah. Unless you got something else you got to do. Yeah. All right, great. So if there are any questions, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Yeah, and I'm also on the Agility Slack if anyone is. And
yeah, it's good shout out there. Yeah, for everyone here. Just post a link to join our Slack channel here if you haven't already, because that is a great spot to be able to discuss things like this with the community. Let me just put a post of that in our chat here. And if you're watching this on YouTube, all of the links that we're posting in the chat here will be posted on the YouTube video as well as comments. Okay, great. So I think that pretty much covers it. If there are any more questions there, we'll end off on that note. Arjuna, thanks again for being, first of all, a long-term partner of Agility. I know we've worked close together for a long time now. You spoke at Faster Conference back in October with us as well. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us today and really do a show and tell on your Node middleware. It's really impressive work there. And I hope other folks in the community can take advantage of it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right.